My name is Olivia Bennett, and I'm 29 years old. 6 days ago, my husband and I were hosting a baby shower at his parents' lake house in Connecticut. It was supposed to be the happiest afternoon of my life. I was 7 months pregnant with our first child, a little boy we had already named Theo. The nursery was painted, the crib was assembled, and for the first time in my life, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. But in the middle of that baby shower, in front of 40 of our closest friends and relatives, my sister-in-law stood up from her chair, walked to the center of the room, and said 7 words that made every single person turn and stare at me. She said that the baby inside me wasn't really mine. She claimed I had stolen it from her. And to prove it, she pulled out a folder thick with documents, medical records, and photographs. Within minutes, my mother-in-law was screaming. My father-in-law was demanding answers. And my husband's own cousins were telling him to leave me right there and then. I stood in the middle of that beautiful sunlit room, 7 months pregnant, sobbing, with one hand on my belly and the other reaching for a husband who I wasn't sure would still believe me. But then my husband did something I never in a million years expected him to do. Something that made his entire family go dead silent. Before I tell you exactly what happened, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and let me know in the comments what state or country you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to that afternoon. The lake house had been in my husband's family for 3 generations. Daniel, my husband, had spent every summer of his childhood there, jumping off the dock with his older sister Rachel and swimming until his lips turned blue. When he told me he wanted to host our baby shower there, I was honestly nervous. His family had a way of making our marriage feel like something they tolerated rather than celebrated, but he insisted. He said that Theo deserved to be welcomed into the world the same way he had been, on that same worn wooden porch overlooking the water. So I agreed. I spent 3 weeks planning every detail. Soft blue and cream balloons shaped like clouds. A dessert table with tiny cupcakes topped with sugar stars. Little glass jars filled with wildflowers from the meadow behind the house. I wanted everything to be perfect, not because I cared about impressing his family, but because I wanted this day to belong to my son. I wanted him to one day see the pictures and know that he was loved before he even took his first breath. I should probably tell you a little about where I come from. I grew up in a small town outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My dad worked at a tire plant for 32 years. My mom cleaned houses on weekends to help pay for my community college tuition. We didn't have vacations or birthday parties at fancy restaurants, but we had Sunday dinners where everyone laughed so hard the windows rattled. When I met Daniel at a coffee shop in Philadelphia 6 years ago, I had no idea his family owned half a shipping company. He never mentioned it. He wore worn-out sneakers and drove a used Honda. It wasn't until our 4th date, when he invited me to a charity gala, that I realized the life he came from. I almost walked away. I told him plainly, I don't belong in your world. And he looked at me with the most serious expression and said, then I'll build a new world with you. That's the man I married 2 years ago. His family, though, was a different story. From the first dinner I ever attended at their estate in Greenwich, I could feel the cold underneath the polite smiles. His mother, Vivian, never once called me by my first name. She called me the girl. His father, Richard, once asked me at Thanksgiving, in front of everyone, whether I had considered what their family's public image would look like if Daniel stayed with someone from my kind of background. I smiled. I swallowed it. I went home and cried into Daniel's shoulder that night, and he promised me he would handle it. But his older sister Rachel was the worst of them all. Rachel was 34, unmarried, and had been trying to have a baby for almost 5 years with 3 different fertility specialists. Every time we visited, she found a way to ask me about my reproductive plans, my cycle, my diet, as if she were studying me. I felt sorry for her at first. I genuinely did. But over the years, her sympathy-seeking turned into something sharper. Something that felt like hunger. When I announced my pregnancy, Rachel didn't congratulate me. She left the room. She didn't call for weeks. When she finally came over for dinner, she stared at my belly the entire time like it was something she wanted to reach in and take. Daniel told me I was being paranoid. He said his sister was just processing grief. I wanted to believe him. I really did. The day of the baby shower, the weather was so beautiful it almost felt unreal. The sky was that perfect early autumn blue, with just a few clouds drifting lazily across it. Guests started arriving around 2 in the afternoon. My mom came early to help me finish setting up. She wore her best dress, the navy one with the white buttons, and she hugged me so tightly I almost cried. She whispered in my ear, "Your grandma would be so proud, baby." Daniel was outside grilling with a few of his cousins, laughing, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking like the happiest man in the world. I remember watching him from the porch, one hand on my belly, and thinking that maybe, finally, his family was starting to accept me. Vivian had even brought a hand-knitted blanket for Theo. Richard had clapped Daniel on the shoulder that morning and said, "A son. That's wonderful, kid." For the first time, I let my guard down. That was my mistake. Around 3:30, after everyone had eaten and the gift opening was about to begin, Rachel stood up. She had been quiet all afternoon, sitting by the window with a glass of sparkling water, watching me. She clinked her fork against her champagne flute, and the room slowly turned toward her. I remember thinking she was going to give a toast. I even smiled at her, grateful. I thought, maybe this is the moment. Maybe she's finally letting go of whatever had been eating her. She walked to the center of the living room, right next to the stack of gifts, and she looked at me. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. And then she said, "Before we open the presents, I need to tell everyone something. Something that's been destroying me for months. Olivia is carrying my baby. She stole him from me." For about 3 full seconds, no one made a sound. I actually laughed. I thought it was a strange joke. I thought maybe the stress of fertility treatments had finally made her say something cruel in a misguided attempt at humor. I looked at Daniel. He had stopped mid-sentence with a cousin by the fireplace. His face was frozen. Then Rachel reached into a leather bag she had been carrying all day, the bag I hadn't thought twice about, and she pulled out a stack of papers. She walked around the room, handing them out. "These are my fertility clinic records," she said, her voice shaking in a way that sounded perfectly practiced. "These are sonograms taken at the Weston Reproductive Center over the past 8 months. This is a statement from Dr. Margaret Cole, the lead embryologist. My embryos, the ones I created with an anonymous donor 2 years ago, were switched. They were implanted into Olivia instead of me. The clinic confirmed it last week." The room started spinning. I grabbed the back of a chair to stay standing. "That's insane," I whispered. "I have never even been to a fertility clinic. I got pregnant naturally. We weren't even trying." But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were looking at the papers in their hands. I saw my own cousin, my blood cousin, reading and frowning. I heard whispers. "These look official. There's a doctor's signature. Look at the dates." Then Rachel pulled out her phone. "And these?" she said, "are photos of me at the clinic the day the embryos were transferred. These are photos of Olivia at a bar in Philadelphia that same weekend, drinking. She wasn't even trying to have a baby. She didn't want one." The photos passed from hand to hand. I had never seen them before. The bar, I had never been to. The woman in them, yes, she looked like me, but I knew I had never been there. My knees started shaking. Vivian slowly rose from the couch. I will never forget the look on her face. It was not shock, it was vindication. It was the look of a woman who had been waiting her entire life to hear exactly what she was hearing. She walked straight across the room and stood in front of me, and before I could even speak, she slapped me across the face so hard that my earring fell to the floor. My mother screamed. My dad stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. "You thief," Vivian hissed, inches from my face. "You filthy, low-class thief. My daughter has suffered for years, and you've been walking around with her baby like it's your own." I couldn't breathe. I could taste blood in my mouth. "I didn't do anything," I sobbed. "I don't even know what she's talking about. Daniel, please, please, Daniel." Richard stepped forward with his arms crossed. He didn't even look at me. He looked at Daniel. "Son," he said, his voice like iron, "you will end this marriage today. Whatever it takes. We'll have papers drawn up tonight. The baby will be returned to Rachel the moment he's born. We will pay Olivia a settlement to disappear, and none of this will ever be spoken of publicly. Dad, Daniel started, but Richard cut him off. This is not a discussion. This is a family crisis. And as the head of this family, I am telling you what must happen. One of the cousins, a man named Graham who I had always been kind to, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I always told you this one was trouble, Danny. Girls like her are opportunists. This is exactly what they do." I looked at my husband. He was standing maybe 10 feet away from me. The entire room was watching him. His mother was gripping his arm. His father was staring him down. Rachel was crying, those perfect rehearsed tears, clutching the phone with the photos. And I was standing there in the middle of everyone, 7 months pregnant with his son, with my mother weeping behind me and my father's fists clenched, waiting for a man to decide whether he believed me or a stack of papers. Daniel didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. He just looked at me. And in that silence, something in me collapsed. Because I thought, for one awful moment, that he was actually considering it. Then he slowly pulled his arm away from his mother. He walked across the room without taking his eyes off me. He stopped in front of me, reached up, and gently touched the red mark his mother had left on my cheek. His hand was shaking, but his voice was not. "Are you hurt?" he asked me quietly. I couldn't even answer. I was crying too hard. He turned around. He faced his family. And then, in the calmest, steadiest voice I have ever heard him use, he said, "My wife has never been to a fertility clinic. Not once in her life. I know this because I have been with her through every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every morning sickness. I know this because I was there the night we conceived our son, and it was not planned, and it was real. Whatever is in those papers is a lie. And I'm going to find out who made it." Vivian started to speak, but he raised one hand. "Not another word, Mom. Not from any of you." He turned to Rachel. She froze. Her tears stopped mid-fall in a way that I will remember for the rest of my life. Because the moment her lie was challenged, the actress in her broke character for just a split second, and I saw something cold and calculating flicker across her face. Daniel saw it too. "Rachel," he said softly, "look at me." She didn't. "Look at me," he said again, sharper this time. She raised her eyes. "I have known you my entire life," he said. "I know what you look like when you're telling the truth, and I know what you look like when you're lying to Mom about who broke her vase when we were 12. I am telling you right now, one time. If you take this back, if you admit it right now, I will not press charges. But if you keep going, I will destroy whoever helped you build this, and I will make sure you never see my son's face." She didn't take it back. She lifted her chin and said, "He's my baby, Daniel." He nodded slowly, as if something had just been confirmed. Then he walked to me, took my hand, and turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, please, come with us. We're leaving." My mom didn't hesitate. My dad picked up my purse from the chair. And we walked out of that lake house together. Behind us, Vivian was screaming. Richard was shouting, "Daniel, if you walk out that door, you are out of this family. You are out of the company." Daniel didn't even flinch. He opened the car door for me, helped me inside, and we drove away. I cried the entire drive back to Philadelphia. I kept apologizing for things I hadn't done. I kept asking him if he was sure, if he really believed me, if he wasn't going to change his mind in the morning. He pulled over once, on the side of the highway, turned to me, and held my face in both his hands. "Olivia Rose," he said, using my middle name the way he only did when he was dead serious. "Listen to me carefully. I know you. I have slept next to you for over 1,000 nights. I have watched you give your last $20 to a stranger outside a grocery store. You did not do this. Somebody set you up, and I am going to find out who and why. Do you understand me?" I nodded. He kissed my forehead. He put the car in drive. And that night, he started making phone calls. The next morning, Daniel hired a private investigator named Martin Reyes, a former FBI agent who had retired to run a small firm in Delaware. He also hired the best reproductive rights attorney in Philadelphia, a woman named Janelle Okafor, who specialized in fraud cases involving fertility clinics. Within 48 hours, Janelle had filed for a court-ordered DNA test, a subpoena of the Weston Reproductive Center's records, and a criminal complaint against Rachel for defamation, fraud, and attempted extortion. Daniel didn't sleep. He barely ate. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night, he was at the kitchen table with his laptop open, his phone pressed to his ear. 4 days after the baby shower, Martin called us into his office. He had a folder in front of him. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I have the answers you're looking for. You're not going to like them." He laid out the evidence one piece at a time. The fertility clinic records Rachel had produced were real documents, but they had been altered. The embryologist's statement had been forged using a signature lifted from an unrelated publication. The photographs of me at the Philadelphia bar were digitally manipulated. The woman in them was Rachel's college roommate, who bore a passing resemblance to me and had been paid $8,000 in cash to pose for the images. The sonograms had been purchased from a medical supply black market website. Rachel had spent, conservatively, close to $70,000 on this operation. And she had not done it alone. Martin slid another piece of paper across the table. A text message thread. "Your mother-in-law, Vivian, helped fund it," he said. "She transferred $45,000 to Rachel over 6 months, labeled as medical support. Your father-in-law knew about it 2 weeks ago and chose to stay silent." There are voice memos on Rachel's cloud backup in which she explicitly states, and I quote, "Once Olivia is out and the baby comes to me, Daniel will come home. Mom said he'll need me more than ever." I had to leave the room. I threw up in Martin's bathroom. Daniel stayed at the table. When I came back, he was pale but steady. He looked at Martin and said, "Press every charge. Every single one." The investigation moved fast after that. Rachel was arrested the following Tuesday on charges of criminal fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and filing falsified medical documents, a felony in Connecticut. Her bail was set at $200,000, and for the first time in her life, her parents refused to pay it. Not because they had a change of heart, but because Janelle had secured a preliminary court order freezing the family's assets pending investigation into Vivian's role. Rachel sat in a holding cell for 6 days. Vivian was questioned by the state attorney's office and offered a plea deal in exchange for testimony. She refused. She was indicted as a co-conspirator 4 weeks later. Richard was not criminally charged, but the shipping company's board, when the story broke in the Greenwich Times, voted unanimously to remove him as chairman. 30 years of reputation, gone in a single news cycle. 1 week after Rachel's arrest, Daniel asked me if I would come with him back to the lake house. His parents had requested a meeting. I was terrified. I was 8 months pregnant by then, and my doctor had told me to avoid stress. But Daniel promised me that whatever happened, I didn't have to say a single word. He just needed me beside him. So I went. We walked into that same living room where I had been slapped 6 weeks earlier. Vivian was sitting on the couch. She looked 10 years older. Her hair was unbrushed. Richard stood by the window, his hands in his pockets. The room smelled like regret. Vivian started crying the moment she saw me. She said, "Olivia, please." I was scared. I didn't know how far Rachel would go. I thought it was just a way to pressure you to leave. Richard added, "We only ever wanted what was best for our family. You have to understand, Daniel, we were protecting our name." Daniel let them speak. He didn't interrupt. When they finished, he sat down across from them, still holding my hand, and he said, "I want you both to listen very carefully because I will not repeat myself. You tried to have my wife declared a criminal. You tried to take my son away from his mother while she was still carrying him. You stood in this room and watched my mother put her hand on Olivia's face. You said nothing. My wife lost 3 pounds that week from stress at 7 months pregnant. The doctor told me she was 1 heartbeat away from preterm labor. You didn't just betray me, you almost killed my son." Vivian was sobbing. Richard looked down at his shoes. Daniel stood up. "As of today, I have no mother. I have no father. I have no sister. My son will never hear your names. If you attempt to contact us, I will seek a restraining order. If you attempt to see him at a hospital, at a school, at a park, I will have you removed. This is not a punishment. This is a consequence. He walked me to the door. He didn't look back. Theo was born on a cold Tuesday morning in January, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a tiny birthmark on his left ankle that matched Daniel's exactly. My mom was in the delivery room with me. My dad paced outside with Daniel, both of them crying before the nurse even came out with the news. When they placed Theo on my chest, I whispered to him, "You are so loved, baby boy. You are so, so loved, and no one will ever take you from me." Rachel was convicted 8 months later on all counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 3, plus restitution of the full amount she had spent on the fraud. Vivian took a plea deal and received 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent injunction against contacting our family. The shipping company was sold within the year, and Richard, at 67, quietly moved to a small townhouse in Florida. None of them have ever met Theo. They never will. As for Daniel and me, we used a portion of the settlement Janelle negotiated to open something I had dreamed about for years but never dared say out loud. A nonprofit called Theo's House, based in Philadelphia, that provides legal support and counseling to women who have been falsely accused of reproductive fraud, infidelity, or parental unfitness during pregnancy or custody battles. In our first year, we helped 43 women. In our second year, 118. Last month, we opened a second location in Pittsburgh. The work doesn't undo what happened to me that afternoon at the lake house. Nothing will. But every time I see a woman walk out of our office with her head held higher than when she walked in, I remember standing in that sunlit room with 40 pairs of eyes on me, being called a thief. And I remember the moment my husband crossed the floor and asked me if I was hurt. That is the kind of love I want every woman to know exists. That is the kind of love I want my son to grow up believing in. And that is the reason I'm telling you this story today. If this touched you in any way, please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your stories, your words, your support, they carry women like me through the hardest nights. Subscribe to HeartPath Stories for more true-to-life tales about love, betrayal, and the families we choose. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never, ever let anyone make you doubt the truth you know in your own bones.